and a lot of schools had hall monitors.
Yeah.
Nobody liked the hall monitors. Nobody liked the teacher that made you follow the rules. Nobody liked the parents that held you to a standard. Nobody likes to submit to, many people don't like to submit
Right.
to authority. But we also live in a climate where it is extremely politically divisive, and it has become socially acceptable to divide a country based on whatever beliefs or standards we have instead of finding a common ground to come together and fight for.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of American Snippets. I'm your co-host, Barb Allen, here today with Adam Davis, who is yet another extraordinary human being going about his life and using his own life and his own experiences to impact others. He's got that absolute never quit attitude and mindset that we love, love, love digging into and sharing with our community. We have a whole bunch of lessons he's going to share with you through his story today. He's a former law enforcement officer, I believe a hostage negotiator as well. He's an author. Now he's a speaker, and he's on a new mission to strengthen and build marriages and help and heal marriages really within the military law enforcement communities. We all know those communities go to enormous lengths to serve others, but what a lot of people don't often understand is that casualty, a ripple effect of that is the tremendous strain it places on marriages and how that whole energy and impact just spreads out through everything in the law enforcement officer's life or the military member's life and impacts people that they serve and protect as well. Adam, we are so excited to have you here with us today. I can't wait to dig into this. You're a super interesting person. And I'm told that we may also be able to get you to sing something for us too.
Oh yeah, that person's in trouble.
Oh no! Look, I do my due diligence, right? I do my research on my people.
So, listen, thank you so much for having me on. It's awesome.
Yeah. So let's get to it, okay? Let's talk a little bit, share with our community your experience. And when I popped up, we posted that we were going to be interviewing you. We did have a couple of people who, had some general questions, and one of them was, what led you into law enforcement as well. So if you're able to touch on that and go from there, and we'll build and pick apart as we go.
Yeah. So I guess you have to take a few steps back.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to go back a little bit.
You do it in your time, man. This is your shit.
I was 5, 6 years old. I was a kid, and a non-family older male sodomized me. And I held on to that until I was in my early 20s.
Wow.
When you hold on to things that are painful, when you hold on to trauma, when you try to deal with things on your own and in your own strength, it is impossible to see the dream in front of you. It's impossible to understand who you are and what your gifts are. And so for a very, very long time, for half my life, essentially, I tried to navigate through the pain in my own power and in my own strength. So it was hard for me to see where I was called to be. It was hard for me to see what my gifts were. So fast forward a little bit, got married. We graduated high school May of 2000 and traded in our high school diploma for a marriage certificate. And we got married in September of 2000, September 16th exactly. And
happy
at 18,
anniversary almost.
Thank you. And so we were 18 when we got married.
Oof.
So when my wife, not even knowing what happened to me as a little boy, she knew, but just not in great detail. Didn't really know how it affected me, and I didn't know how it really affected me until a few years later. Our first child was on the way, and it really, really come to my mind, and so I had to I had to address it. I had a lot of hate. I had a lot of hate in my heart for the person that did that to me, because I felt like that I had been robbed of a lot. And when my oldest was on the way, I felt like there was no way that I could be the best father for him, continue to be a good husband for my wife, be a better man, until I got rid of the negative feelings that I had towards a person who did this to me when I was just a kid. And so I had to go through a process of forgiveness. So I say all that to lead up
Yeah.
to, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew that in high school, all I wanted to do was be in the military. I wanted to join the Marine Corps. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to go to college, become a lawyer, and be a lawyer in the military. That's all I ever wanted to do. And so when those dreams were crushed because of a tumor, cyst, whatever on my ear drum, that was dashed. I couldn't get in the military, so I was just like wandering at sea here. So grew up strong faith. At least I thought I had strong faith, and I felt like, the good men that were around me. I looked, and whenever they were needed, they were there. They had good families. They were just great human beings, and they were cops. And I always thought, man, I'd really like to be like those guys. Not just wearing the badge, not just the uniform, but just the good human beings that they are. They're good men, and I wanted to be that. And so later on, things rocked around, and 2009, I think, yeah, 2009. In law enforcement, it was really out of a desire to serve. It was a desire to be a better man, to give back. And I went in with the full intention of retiring in 25 years, or however long it,
Yeah.
30 years, whatever. And, but I didn't, apparently there's a difference between faith and faith when it's tested. And I mean, really tested. And I know that my faith had been tested before, but being faced with your own mortality changes the game a little bit. And for me, you know, losing friends, seeing brothers that were killed in the line of duty, whether, heart attacks or uh, being assaulted, murdered, ambushed, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. Loss is loss, grief is grief, and it's horrible. And so it caused me to, and then losing some of my very close family, it caused me to look around and understand, hey, the life is short. And there's a book by a man named I think Robert D. Smith. It's called 20,000 Days and Counting. And essentially, the average male lives 20,000 days. So I did the math, and I looked at how many days I had opportunities for so far, and I looked at what I had done with them. And so I wanted to be the best cop I could be. And I was not prepared for the chronic, around the clock uh, attacks from every angle. And that's not a cop out. It's not a complaint. It's not whining. I just wasn't prepared, and I wasn't prepared for what hypervigilance does to your mind, your body, relationships. And we're always told to stay in certain awareness modes, but at the time it seemed like there was officer ambushes every 24 hours. I know that wasn't the case, but it seemed like it.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't ready to check out yet. I got to the point to where I was drinking quite a bit. And I'd come home and have a couple here and there, whatever. But I would binge drink, and when I would binge drink, I would binge drink. I mean, it was bad, and led me down some other roads. Just not very proud of, and I've talked openly about that stuff, and it got to the point to where I was just in a really dark place. But I started my career in law enforcement out of really seeing good men around me that I wanted to emulate. I wanted to be like, and I wanted my families to be like their families, and they were strong men. And I just always had cops around me, as I aged, And it was just something that I want to be a part of. But
Right. So let me just stop
things
one sec here.
change.
Yeah,
Things
let me
change.
stop one sec here and talk, because you touched on a couple of things, and I know
Yeah.
this what you just said is packed with so many things I want to dig into, and what you're going to say is going to be packed into so many things. So let me just take this a little bit here. Let's talk first about how old were you when they discovered that tumor or the cyst on your ear, and you realized you couldn't
16 or 17.
so you're
But
16 or 17, and you had wanted, like, until then, that had been your
yeah,
focus, right? I was going to do this, I was going to do that. And I'm going to
yeah,
pull on this for a second because it's an important area, right? And I think you probably feel where I'm going with this. So often we convince ourselves that this is our path. I'm only going to be okay if this happens, right? And it just never occurs to you that anything other than what you've set out for yourself is going to be how it's going to be. And
nope.
very often we're hit with that. Jason Redman calls them life's ambushes, and it just happens. It happens all the time, right? We're locked in, we're focused, we got it dialed in. We don't see anything else but this one thing, and then that one thing
No.
doesn't happen or is taken from us. And how did
Yeah.
you, when you're a teenager, especially coping skills and all that, and especially given
Yeah.
what you've been through, right?
Yeah.
So how did you then, like, not a lot of people then would be like, I can't do this, and this happened to me when I was 5, and now I have this, and life's unfair, and it's just not meant to be for me. So I'm going to turn into this bitter person at 16 years old and just
I
go work
was.
at Walmart or
I was.
something,
I was
right?
really bitter. I was really
Yeah.
bitter. It's honestly, it's looking back, it is the grace of God. It is a miracle of life itself that I was still standing then,
Yeah.
and that I'm still standing now. But even after they said you are never going to be in the military,
Yeah.
I tried for about 5 years to break in. Like, I was going through every channel I could get through until they eventually said, please don't ever
Stop.
call us back.
Wow.
You're never going to be in the military. You're permanently disqualified. You're not getting in. Like,
Wow.
we're not going to have you. And so it was just, navigating through that. I mean, it was a miracle. I mean, it was a miracle because I was not whole. I was not healed. I was not prepared for anything, much less marriage at 18. But here we are 19 years later. And so it's just, it's one of those things that life is messy, and we get ambushed, like you were saying, like Jason said, and but we have to be willing to fight back. We have to be willing to adapt. We have to be willing to be open to what is there. And a lot of times, our true destiny is not even in the place that it would seem most likely.
Right.
And I would have never, ever, at 18 or 16 or at any age, dreamed that I would have 5 books
Right.
under my belt at this point. Never, or working with some of my good friends that I have now. It's unthinkable. So yeah, I mean, don't focus on. We get tunnel vision. We talk about tunnel vision in law enforcement, military life, and you see one thing, and that's all you see, and your blinders on. You can't see anything outside of that. Be open to what may be there, because there's something. It may not be what you think. That's all I'm going to think outside the box.
Yeah,
So,
I'm like, there's always what I focus on a lot. What I talk about is, like, there's always some kind of purpose to the painful, your pain
yeah,
points, right? And but
yeah,
it can be so hard for me when it happened to me. It continues to happen different. It can be hard, right? To
yeah,
be like, okay, take a minute, and this isn't just completely unfair, and my life doesn't suck, and I'm not just being persecuted by the gods. There's a purpose in this, and you have to
yeah.
kind of be able to take a breath for a second and just trust that if you don't know the purpose now, it's going to be revealed at some point, and
That's right.
get through, like, one step at a time, and just know that on the other side of that. But so that you were able to do that at 16 is pretty remarkable. Even though you were bitter and you fought and you did all this, you didn't just give up, right? You were just like,
Yeah.
no, because that can be the first tendency, right? It could just be too painful, or you could just have such overwhelming anger. You don't know how to cope with it. So you just don't. You just shut it off and go in some other.
Yeah.
So, props to you for getting that far. And however ugly or messy it was, you made it through. And
Got through
it doesn't have to be pretty. You just got to do it, right?
That's right.
So now you get into, how did you then go through the process of becoming, where were you when you became a law enforcement
Yeah.
officer?
So prior to being in law enforcement, I had been in pest control for several years, and I had got into a position as a manager. And March 5th of 2009, I walked in to work, and I was fired because I had fired the owner's son. he had, he had
Bravo.
been he had been repeatedly late for work, and the owner said, "Do what you got to do," and I said, "Get your and get out." So it didn't work out in my favor,
Fired the
but
owner's son. That's
yeah,
genius.
and and so March 5th of that year, March 5th was my oldest son's birthday. So I was supposed to go home to a big birthday party where all the family was and everybody was happy and celebrating. And my wife was pregnant with our third child, and she was a stay-at-home mom. And I had to go home that day and say, I don't have a job, and I don't know how we're going to make it. And so I went home and told her, I don't have a job, but I will figure a way out to make it. And
Right.
so for the next, I started applying in law enforcement. I'd been applying in law enforcement, different jobs. And 6 months later, an opportunity to come up to police in my hometown. And I had been doing everything I could and held on. And God provided in miraculous ways. I did everything, like all the odd and end work, and made it work until law enforcement opened up. And in my heart, I wanted to do it until I could retire. But things changed down the road, and we can get into that. But
Yeah.
it was always, I still have a love for law enforcement. I miss wearing that uniform and doing the work and the camaraderie, but having far more impact now than I could have ever had where I was at.
Yeah, true. Um, okay, so let's go into it a little bit then. You're on the job. Do you want to talk, a little bit? And you've spoken and you speak freely, and you already did here to some extent about things that happen on the job and just the realities, right? And I know today,
Yeah.
given this climate kind of we're existing in, where people are just not people, all people, but too many people just have such an awful impression of cops, of police officers. And it was one thing I remember growing up. We would have the jokes like, cop, don't let the cop get you. Bad boys. That whole thing, right? But it was never without respect, and we would
Right.
never dream, if we were approached by a law enforcement officer, we would never dream of doing the thing. You get pulled over for a speeding ticket, and you come out of the car and you scream at the law enforcement. You got the camera there, and all of a sudden, like, the police officer is the bad guy, right? For doing his job.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit and give people an inside perspective on what the realities are of being a law enforcement officer, and, why we should maybe think twice about just putting a blanket statement. In any profession, there's good people and there's bad people in
Yeah.
any profession.
Go back,
But
go back to
yeah.
school in your mind.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools had hall monitors.
Yeah.
Nobody liked the hall monitors. Nobody liked the teacher that made you follow the rules. Nobody liked the parents that held you to a standard. Nobody likes to submit to, many people don't like to submit
Right.
to authority. But we also live in a climate where it is extremely politically divisive, and it has become socially acceptable to divide a country based on whatever beliefs or standards we have, instead of finding a common ground to come together and fight for.
Right.
And that has been reflected in many marriages as well. Instead of finding common ground to work for and work together and fight for each other, we destroy each other, and we destroy families and future generations because of hate and selfishness. And there's so many different angles that I could go down this road. But at the end of the day, it is, in my mind, um, police officers, law enforcement have become a chess piece on a playing board. And it's for whoever can get the most political gain. And are there bad cops? Absolutely, there's bad cops. But you're talking less than 1% of the cops that exist are bad. if pharmacists or doctors or teachers or anybody else that you would look to had that type of, good to bad ratio,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be something to discuss. It's because we're talking about men and women who have the authority and have the power to take away the freedom of evil. And evil has a lot of power um, in this world. And so it has a lot of power, and it's in a lot of places, like, there's political people who are bad. And,
Yeah.
there's preachers who are bad.
Yep.
There's cops who are bad. So at the end of the day, it boils down to the ancient battle of good versus evil on a very, very ultimate, oversimplified scale. So why you shouldn't blanket statement that all cops are bad or go into it is because you're probably basing that on your own past experiences. You can't be pissed off with a cop if he writes you a ticket if you were speeding. You can't be mad at a cop if he writes you a ticket because you or arrest you because you were drunk driving.
Right.
You can't be mad at them for doing their job. They don't write the law. Their job is literally law enforcement. They don't write the law. If you don't like the law, contact your legislation.
Right.
So they have some discretion, but most of the time they just have to do their job. So, they're human beings. Every cop that you see put on a uniform, it doesn't matter how big, how bad, how muscular, how mean that they may appear, they're somebody's son or daughter. They're
Right.
somebody's husband or wife, somebody's mother, father, aunt, uncle, nephew, or niece. There's somebody that loves them and cares about them. And if we got back to the point to where we respected each other enough to find common ground on our differences, we could probably change the trajectory of a lot of different lives and our country, and go back to the things that made us great in the beginning. And that was coming together saying, hey, you know what? You may be a Democrat. I may be this. You may be this. I may be this. I love you. You're a human being. I understand where you're at. Let's find a way to work together. And that has become a lost art in our country. And I think that is just, talking about law enforcement and climate around law enforcement. It is just an indicator of deeper problems. And so it's not going to change with one person, but it can start with one person. And that's why I started writing devotions for cops.
Yeah.
And that's where it all began.
Awesome. And we're going to I definitely want to get into your books a minute, because it's also an approach that not too many people take, so in a way that was also a bold approach in your books, because crazy as it is, faith and spirituality is not a common approach for, big, tough guys. Right.
Wasn't for me.
Yeah. So that's cool. Can you think about a moment, a day, an experience on your job, whether in hostage negotiation or another aspect of it, that impacted you in some way, and what that was?
Uh,
I know there had to be a lot of the days, right? But
there was a lot of days.
yeah.
Just seeing loss of life, especially people who didn't do anything wrong, innocent people. That's For me, being in the presence of death had a way of putting a perspective on life for me. And I think that it was a gift that they gave me to see that it's really, Solomon said, I believe it's in Proverbs or Ecclesiastes. My brain, I haven't finished my coffee, so don't quote me.
No, we're quoting you.
Life is but a vapor. Yeah. And so if you look at this coffee cup and you see the vapor that comes up just as quick as it disappears, that's how short our life is. And so really just seeing the horrible evil that exists in this world, like not from a news headline perspective,
right,
not from a social media headline perspective, on scene, right present with everything. That changed. I mean, it didn't, that's not what made me want to leave law enforcement, but it gave me a gift of perspective. And and losing loved ones. And so I think it probably was contributing to a few dreams that I had. I don't know if it was that contributing to it or if it was just really God trying to get my attention, but I'd laid down, obviously went to sleep and woke up in the middle of the night, like in a absolute panic. I had dreamt that I was laying in a casket and I was in a funeral home and I could hear people murmuring. I couldn't hear their words, but I could hear people standing around me talking, and I could smell like there was a distinct smell. And I remember thinking, this, I'm dead. This isn't good. And then there was a snap, and there was a voice that said, "Did you do what I called you to do?"
Hmm.
And then I had another dream, very similar. I was in a casket, and they were lowering me in the ground, and I could see through the top, and they were throwing dirt on me. And just before I began to panic, I heard there was a snap and a voice that said, "Did you finish what I called you to do?"
Wow.
And so that sort of put a different perspective on things. And so I become really, really intentional with the way I love people, especially those closest to me. And then the broken people, because I am a broken people. And so just, really going against what culture would define you as, okay? A big, whatever, and you're supposed to be this strong, intimidating person, but just really love like Jesus loved, and being present and doing what you can to love others. And so that's what I tried to start doing, and speaking life into everybody that I could speak life into, and encouraging. I didn't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of money, but what we all have is the ability and power to speak life to other people.
Yeah.
And that's really what reveals who we are down in here, is by the words we speak and the actions that we take. So that's sort of what led to writing. But that was there were some cases. I mean, anytime you're on a case where somebody's taking their own life, for me, I always thought, what took them to this point? What got them here? I wanted to learn everything about them. I wanted to know what got them there, or the murders of the innocent people, the rapes of children, the hostage that was a 5-year-old autistic boy for a week in a bunker, the school bus driver who was murdered because he wouldn't give up the lives of kids on the bus. I mean, I could go down on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, everybody has their own pain. Everybody has their own trauma, and that's not discounting the next person's. Everybody's trauma is more important than the person next to them, because it's yours. You
Mhm.
own it. And so I had to get perspective, and that perspective led me to discover a gift in a dark place.
Yeah. And so you talk about when you responded to a scene where somebody had taken their own life and wanting to know what got them there. And then I've heard you share stories about how you found yourself in that place as
Yeah.
well.
Hmm.
So, you
It's
know,
yeah. So there's a common thread
yeah,
for people who want to take their own life, you know, um, and that is absolute and utter total hopelessness.
yeah,
And it's overwhelming hopelessness, almost to the point to where it feels like you're being choked right here, and you can't hardly breathe anymore. And I remember being in that place, and I thank God that um, the power of the Holy Spirit intervened. That when I was at my lowest point, He loved me regardless, and I discovered a true love. I remember I grew up in a pastor's home. After my parents divorced when I was real young, my mother remarried, and she remarried an Assembly of God pastor. And so I was going to church all the time. I was going to church all the time. And I thought that going to church and trying to follow a set of rules would cause God to love me, would cause me to have an easier life,
right.
that I would be able to get into heaven and all this other stuff. And what I found was I was ill-equipped to handle the evil that really existed on the other side of the badge, like on the streets in this world. And so I had faith. I never doubted that God existed. I never doubted that He was real. I doubted His goodness and His love, and I had to get to the point to where it was literally I was down to, okay, I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to completely surrender to Him, and really, really whatever He has for me. Now, growing up, I had went to a lot of church services, but you got to go back to what the big block was from the beginning that I had never talked to anybody about, because I carried shame and guilt and filth and all this other stuff from a young age. It was hard for me to see God as a good father. It was hard for me to see Him as somebody who loved me for me, because I was not lovable in my mind. And so I looked around and, hey, I would be literally, my wife and kids would be better off if I was dead. Like, they would have more money. I wouldn't be a burden to anybody. I know I'm a burden to everybody I come in contact with. I've got bills. We'll work 25 years and still have to get another job. Everybody, it's just the world's going to hell in a handbasket. What is the freaking purpose? What's the use? And so I'm sitting in a car one day. I had went through in my patrol car, and I was at a break. I'd been working overtime, and I got to the point where I could take a break. And so I was sitting there, and I really was at the point of just. And there's so many people that feel like this today, and you're going to be around them today, and they may not be wearing a police uniform, but they're around you, and they're not going to tell you this. They feel so overwhelmingly hopeless. And that's not a sign of weakness. Don't discount their emotions or where they're at or what they're feeling or what they're saying. Love them. Love them. And tell them you love them. Listen to them. And I was in that car, and I had wrestled with the love and goodness of God for months. I don't know how long it was, for months. It was more like, if you're God and if you love and you love us, then why all the pain in this world? Why do children suffer? Why do all these things happen? So I had to get to the point to where I didn't believe in Him because a preacher told me to believe in Him, or because somebody else told me to believe in Him. I had to get to the point to where I believed in Him for no other reason than I chose to believe in Him. Now, I know that the Bible tells me that even the demons choose to believe. They believe. But I chose to believe in complete surrender, like literally, hey, I'm yours. Today's either I'm taking my life or I'm giving it all to you. And I gave it all to Him that day. And it wasn't like this immediate change. What did happen immediately, and I wish that I could adequately describe it, convey it, so that anybody who I told it to felt it immediately. When I verbally said in my patrol car, I said, I believe in you for no other reason than I choose to believe. I give you everything. I love you. Please help me, because I cannot help myself at this point. I can't do this life without you. I have been hugged by a lot of people. I've been hugged by my mama. I've been hugged by my grandmama, my wife, my kids, so many friends, family, but nothing compared to the overwhelming embrace of love I felt in that car by myself that day. And from that moment on, I made it a mission. Like, I feel obligated as a bondservant of love to love Him back by loving other people and by loving myself and giving back to others through pain. And no matter where we're at. And so I was always taught to give out of the place of your greatest need. And my greatest need for a long time was love. And so I began to love, and that was what drove me to start writing. So I traded in all the alcohol for, I had realized that I enjoyed sitting down to write. So I sat down and just started just writing. It was nothing that anybody's read. And I started writing, and it made me feel a lot better. And so that's sort of what led me to write my first book.
Yeah, writing can be a complete release, cathartic release. It could be torturous, but it could be a release too. But let me just, who was it? Hemingway said, "Oh, anybody can write a book. All you have to do is sit down and like slice your veins open, kind of thing, And, I've written a couple of books and I know like it's not all, but when you're writing
painful.
what you feel and you're in that moment, it's like you're not even thinking, it's just pouring through you and out, and it's just effortless. But here's what I love about your story. And this is what I've been so lucky to speak to a lot of people who are faith-based. And there's been something about it. I'm like, what is just so awesome about hearing this person's story? And it was just listening to you right now. It just kind of came to me. And so here's what it is. I don't know if this has come to you yet or not. It is very easy for people to confuse faith with religion, or to blame God or whatever. So, I was raised in the Catholic Church. I did not have a good experience with much of that. I had my own struggles. I faced my own true evil in the world. And I've had that moment you talked about, but I've also felt similar responses to when I kind of surrendered to. So I can relate to all that. But here's why I think is more about your stories is for all these people listening who think that faith must go hand in hand with a religion and with a practice or with rules and all that. And if that's how you choose to follow faith, that's how you find comfort, great. But more important than sitting your butt in some church pew every week or fasting or doing what the rule is, when you get to hear directly, like there are people who are not going to respond to a priest lecturing from a pulpit or whatever the other religions, how they do it. But when you can sit down and you can speak to one human one-on-one and hear that applied in real life, I think it's more powerful than when you're sitting in there. So hearing your story, this is why it's so important that you in particular get out there. People like Teo who are faith-based, tell your stories over and over and over. And just when you're communicating that, like for me, you are the person where that came through to me, where I understand the power. I've always known what it was, but I didn't know how to articulate it. Right. So that's what it was. Like when you hear the story and you get to feel the intensity and the emotion involved, there's no denying that. So if someone now is listening, if you are listening to the story and you're someone who believes that faith must go hand in hand with the religion, listen to Adam Davis' story more and more, get his books, which he's going to talk about here in a moment. Follow him online, hear his story, and follow more people who are faith-based, share their stories, listen to them, and you're going to get that coming to you more than you would necessarily sit in a church, I think. Now I'm going to my parents are going to scream at me.
No, listen. No,
you don't have to feel it the same way.
No, let me address that. Because as a cop, most Sundays when your family's in church, you're working.
Yeah.
There's different this goes back to something I said early on in our interview. There's so many different things that we could interpret differently in scripture. Not all of it is literally black and white. But if you're called to serve, then serve. We are called to be the church, not a building. The building will burn. We are called to be the church wherever we're at, wherever we are. We are called to be salt and light. We're called to be walking in his truth, in the love that Jesus commanded us to walk in. No greater commandment than to love him and love others. So don't be condemned, because the enemy of our soul, he has one job, and that is to kill, steal, and destroy. He does that by condemning you, making you feel guilty about it. And there's a difference between condemnation and conviction, but we'll get into that later. So don't feel guilty about not going because you're serving. And do you have to be a Christian to go? I mean, to go to church, to go to heaven? I don't think so. But that's, just be sure you've got a community of people around you.
Right.
That is so important. So
Perfect.
anyway.
Okay, so let's go before we run out of time. Let's get to these books, right?
Yep.
Obviously, people listening haven't figured it out by now. Faith is a big part of it, right? So, but it is kind of an area that is a little taboo to go to, especially these days, where faith is often just called terrible things, right? But
yeah, but so is suicide, and so is my pain.
yes,
We're
right,
not supposed to talk about being molested or sodomized as a kid.
right.
We're not supposed to talk about feeling suicidal, and we're also not supposed to talk about faith. So what are we supposed to talk about? If
Right,
everything's taboo, what are we supposed to
right.
talk about?
I think in some way, I think there's almost a bigger audience of people who would be willing to listen to your stories of abuse
Yeah.
and than are open to hearing about the faith part. That's just my thoughts based on what I'm seeing out there. I could be wrong. I hope I am wrong. But let's go in to your books. Talk about what they are, why you started them, and what your mission is with these.
Yep. Right after Ferguson, the events in Ferguson, Missouri happened, which media had always sort of been bad news about cops.
Yeah. Yep.
Always generates clicks and gets media attention. So after Ferguson, it really amped up, and there's a lot of bad stuff going on, a lot of toxic stuff going on. And I sat down one night. I come home, took off my shirt, my vest, my belt, and sat down and started writing. And I was sort of praying while I was writing. And I remember saying, who is going to speak life to cops? Who is going to speak life to them? Because nobody is doing it right now. Everybody is attacking all of us. Who is going to speak life? And I felt something down deep in my spirit that said, write a book. And my internal argument or disagreement with that was, you got the wrong house. I'm not the right guy. I don't have a PhD. I'm not a chaplain. I haven't been doing this 35 years. I am not the guy. But this is also after the period of me wrestling with understanding and doubting his love and goodness. And so I started writing it pretty soon, a day or two. And that first book was called Spirit and Truth. And it was self-published, little bitty paperback, 25,000 words, but humble beginnings that opened the door to a publisher to discover me and give me a contract for my first book, which was Behind the Badge. And it's a 365-day devotion for law enforcement. It's like imitation leather, really pretty. And they gave me a contract for that, and that released May 1st of 2018. And on May 1st of 2018, I signed my first multi-book contract.
Nice.
With the same publisher to co-author 3 books with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who dear friend. And so our first book together was Bulletproof Marriage. And this little book has opened up a lot of doors. It's about 60,000 words, but it's a 90-day challenge that will kick you in the pants and get you straightened up. And it'll challenge your marriage. It's, there's literally 90 days of discussions and scriptures and prayers and stories and applications that will challenge you to the core. So that's there's one that I don't mention because it was terrible and it was self-published. So that was 4. And then my 5th one,
We
I
don't
finished
talk about that.
No, and then my 5th one I finished earlier this year that will release in 2020, and it's called On Spiritual Combat. Yeah. And it's based on Colonel Grossman's book On Combat, which is about the physiology and psychology of killing. So anyway, yeah, it'll come out next year. And then, of course, I've got 3 others that I'm working on that are sort of hush hush, but they'll be beautiful and talk about them in their own time. So I've been featured on Fox News and Entrepreneur Magazine, Huffington Post, and a bunch of others I can't think of right now. So I've written in a lot of places. So I love it. It's therapeutic, it's healing, and I protect the gift because it probably saved me.
So are these books, can someone who is not in law enforcement apply the lessons in those books?
Oh, I'm sure they can. Listen, I was in Barnes and Noble in my hometown, and I was walking in the aisle where this book was on the shelf, and I was just sort of walking back quietly praying. I wasn't being weird about it. I was just walking back and forth like I was browsing, but I
I'm
was
not calling
praying.
security on you. Yeah.
I was praying right here, and this guy walks up, and he's just standing there, and he's got a mohawk or whatever, with a short mohawk, big guy, don't tread on me shirt, tattoos, just a real big dude. And he's like, "What's up?" And I said, "Hey, how you doing? What's up?" He was like, "I'm looking for devotion." And I was like, shameless author plug moment. And so I was like, "Hey, buddy, this may be a good one. This may be a good one." And he picked it up and he said, "I effing hate cops. Let me
Ooh.
tell you why I effing hate cops." And then he told me, "Well, I'm a believer. I love Jesus and all this." And I said, "Let me challenge you." I said, "Even if you don't get this book, you can find it. I'm sure you can find an ebook or something somewhere. Read it once a day. And as you read it, pray for the effing cops you hate." And he began to have tears run down his face. And he opened up why he hated cops. And it was one incident. And he began to find healing right there in Barnes and Noble.
Wow. That's
So
crazy. Yeah.
so it's not just a book for cops or supporters of cops. If you hate a cop and you're a Christian or you have deep faith, then I want you to get this, read it once a day and pray for cops, because you don't want to think about a world where we don't have them. And
No.
so, I've had people who did reviews of this book who were not cops who said, "This book is just written for cops. If you're not a cop, you're not going to understand it." But I think you'll enjoy it. People watch TV shows about cops all the time. They're not cops, but they watch them. And then this one, there's some language in here that is specific to people in military and law enforcement community, and that is the phrase sheepdog. And there's an introduction that explains who a sheepdog is and who the sheepdog are, and if that applies to you. In this case, in the case of this book, it is the one who serves. Arguably, it could be both spouses,
Right.
regardless if both spouses serve. But for the sake of streamlining a publishing arrangement, we have a section for the sheepdog and the spouse, a quick tip, questions for discussion, and all that good stuff. So, yeah, I think that it could be, I've heard from numerous people that this is good for any marriage, military, first responder, or not. It's good for any marriage. So just be sure to read the introduction so you'll understand that I'm not literally talking to a sheepdog like a dog, that I'm talking to a group of people. So
Excellent. All right. And so where can people find out more about you to hire you to speak or get your books?
Yep. So you can go to teamneverquit.com. I'm on the speakers page there, theadamdavis.com. I lovingly and graciously get to serve alongside of Taya Kyle and the team at the Chris Kyle Frog Foundation as Director of Outreach. So if there's anything that we can partner with you on that end, if you want to support us from that angle, we would certainly love to have you on board. We are serving the families of those who serve us, and that is so important to me. And so you can find me theadamdavis.com, Chris Kyle Foundation website, or Team Never Quit. And or you can just email me directly, info@theadamdavis.com.
Excellent. And Taya is going to be the MC at our event in April in DC.
Oh, awesome.
Super excited about that.
That's going to be awesome.
I got to meet her, years ago, and now I get to, call her a friend. And so I did give her full permission. Everybody always wants her on to talk about her serious side, but Taya, she's got like this wicked sense of humor, right? And I love it. I love it. It's why we're friends, I think. But so I gave her permission that she can roast our guests. She can roast our speakers as she MCs the event. And I think that's truly the reason why that she agreed to do it. But the Chris Kyle Frog Foundation is a beneficiary of this event. So
that's so awesome.
So it'll be awesome.
So, I'm going to wrap it up with this. The very first thing you asked me mentioned was about me singing. And I'm not going to sing, but I will tell you that 19 years ago on September 16th, hang on, did I lose you?
There we did for a second.
19 years ago on September 16th, when my wife walked down the aisle and we said, I do. She had no idea that I was going to grab a microphone and sing Your Love Amazes Me by John Berry. And
Wow.
so
Good for
I
you.
sang, I've sang throughout my life, but I try not to do it publicly unless somebody asks me to, but that's where it comes from. So
That's
it's,
excellent.
yep.
That's great.
So
Good for you.
check it out on Instagram because it's coming because the anniversary is Monday. So she doesn't know that that's going to happen. I'm going to do it for her on Instagram. So yeah,
Oh, I'm
look for
totally going to watch
that.
and then I'm going to share it. Okay, a couple quick questions before we go.
Yeah.
We talk a lot here at American Snippets. Part of why we do what we do, the compelling
Yep.
reason, is a lot on what you touched on how people
Yep.
are focusing on the divisiveness instead of focusing on the positive. The American dream, super important to us. We go into that deeply in our own programs and our own talks. But we like to ask our guests, and I'm going to ask you here, what does the American dream mean to you?
The American dream for me was being able to use the gifts and talents that I was given to create a way of life for my family while serving others and giving back and helping make the country better, leaving it a little bit better than what I found it.
Excellent. Adam, thank you so much for joining us here today. I can't wait. I feel like we're going to stay in touch and follow up with you, as we move forward. And definitely when you come to New York, let us know and we'll get our people out to your talk.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much.
much.